Let's talk about the number one exercise you should be doing if you want to stop making streaky, messy, or even beginner-looking portraits. So I have here a book of Sargent's charcoal portrait drawings, and this is going to be a really great example of illustrating something that Sargent does so effectively that we aren't practicing enough. The book I'm looking at is Sargent's Portraits in Charcoal series that was put out by the Morgan Library right through the beginning of 2020. And this is the book of all of the drawings that were in this exhibition. So let's go ahead and turn to this portrait of Ethel Barrymore. What stands out to you about the value structure of this portrait? I know from all of my experience helping artists to really break through to the next level painting portraits, the real thing that stands out to me is just how compressed and flattened the value structure is. And specifically, what I'm thinking of is I'm noticing just how much there really isn't much rendering, much shading in the flesh tones. Really, this drawing is made up of the shape of the face. We have some very subtle, soft edges showing some of the contours of the nose, but a lot of the nose is actually implied by where the eye that's off to the left-hand side of the nose is cut off. But really, we see two values. We see the white of the paper, and then we see a dark value. We see that value in the eyebrows, we see it in the eyes. We see a slightly softened version of this in the lips. And really, the only place in this drawing where we have a lot of variation is in the hair. And I would argue that in some ways the hair is kind of the star of this piece. Now, if you all could go back in time and sketch Ethel Barrymore alongside Sargent, I imagine this probably would have been a pretty tricky piece, because the temptation when we are rendering a portrait, especially when we're thinking about the values, is that we really want there to be shading. We really want to render out the form. We really want to do everything we can to evoke the 3D nature of what we are looking at and trying to depict on this 2D surface that we're drawing on or that we're painting on. And so I want to talk about the one exercise that is really going to help you skyrocket forward, whether you already have a really clear idea that values are a problem for you, or you just feel like there is something missing from your paintings in terms of being able to get the level of realism that you want. Oftentimes, value plays a really important role in this. And it's not just being able to take something that you're looking at in full color and strip the color from it and depict it exactly as you see it, just in black and white. Really thinking effectively in value helps us because it forces us to make a lot of decisions that actually have a cascading effect through the rest of the image. So let me go ahead and show you what I mean. In contrast to this portrait of Ethel Barrymore that we were just talking about, here I have Sargent's portrait of Dr. Charles Flesher. And one thing that I think is really interesting about this piece is that this really has the opposite phenomenon, where we have a lot of different gradations of dark describing the way in which his face has form. So we have this very dark shadow that just starts right here along the edge of the face. Then we have a mid-tone between the nose and the terminator for this shadow. And then we have an area that is pretty decisively in the light. And along the way, we have all kinds of details like the brows, the iris, all the different folds of the upper lid. We have slight detail in the mustache. There's just a lot to get caught up in. And I think this would actually be more comfortable for most artists. And the reason is really simple. It's that we don't have to make the decision if we are giving ourselves an infinite value range of how to simplify this image. And every time we sit down to paint, we are simplifying something about that image. We simply aren't ever going to capture the full nuance of what nature presents before us, even if we're painting photorealistically, which you probably aren't anyway if you're watching my channel, because this isn't what I do. But I think the real challenge on a piece like this is to ask yourself, if I had to depict this in only two values, how would I do it? And that brings me to the exercise we all should be doing if we want to reach the next level in our work. And that is deliberately doing two value studies. Now, for those of you familiar with notans, this might sound really familiar, but this isn't just about the notan, and that's why I'm not using this term first and foremost. When I think of something like a notan, the first thing that comes to mind is an app like Notanizer that you can get on your phone, or using the threshold tool in Photoshop to automatically calculate what the notan for a particular painting would look like. And I think this really highlights to me the distinction that I want to speak to here. This isn't about getting that kind of cookie cutter, computer generated result. This is about really thinking and understanding the design of values that you see in a particular image. So I might use notan in describing this in this video, but you can also think of this as being distinct from what you might associate with a notan or a two-value study. Here we have yet another Sargent charcoal portrait. This is of William Butler Yeats, and we have a quick little sketch study that I created of this. My study wasn't strictly intended to be a notan. It wasn't meant to be exactly two values. But when you look at my somewhat simplified version of this, I think you can start to see how we can detach ourselves from getting sucked in to things like the facial features and really succumbing to the temptation to really render out our values and create a lot of gradations of values, or create a really strong variety of edges in favor of instead really trying to think about this just in terms of light and dark. So if we go back to this previous drawing of Dr. Charles Fleischer, I want to walk you through exactly what you need to be thinking about to do this exercise effectively on your own. There's several ways that you can do this. You can do this on an iPad using something like Procreate. If that were the case, you would set your color to black, you would use the hard round brush for the entire thing, and you would turn off opacity so that the entire time you either have pure white or you have pure black, and you don't have any variation in the edges because you're not using something that has a softened edge already. You can also do this in something like pencil. Pencil can be a little bit tricky because it's really natural to get certain value variation in pencil. All you have to do is use a slightly lighter touch, or all your pencil has to do is get a little bit duller and suddenly you have a softer edge. Nonetheless, you can absolutely try and hold yourself to two values in pencil. This can also be really great given that pencil allows you to work to try and get the drawing really dialed in. It gives you room to do things like erase and rework sections. What I'm going to focus on today is a combination of using pencil to try and get the basic drawing in, and then I'm going to show you how you can use something like a marker or even a Sharpie to really get your two values in. This is great because marker doesn't really allow you to get that value variation, and it also doesn't encourage you to soften edges the same way that you might be tempted to in pencil. And then a final way that you can do this is using paint. Now, if you were to do a two-value study like this using oil paint, what I would encourage you to do is use the white of your canvas as your light value, and I would go ahead and mix up a dark for your dark. And just like I've emphasized throughout the rest of this video, I would encourage you not to soften or blend any of your edges. You want to think about creating really hard, decisive, clean strokes the entire time. Okay, so first things first, for the sake of actually putting together this YouTube video, I'm doing something that I really try and warn students against as much as possible, which is that I am drawing on an angle. I have both my reference and I have the surface that I'm drawing on. I have my notebook flat on the table, and obviously I'm sitting upright, which means that I'm not viewing every part of my drawing or every part of the reference from straight on. And that can really cause problems. That being said, I kind of have to make do to make a YouTube video. So one of the first things that you want to do whenever you are painting, whenever you're drawing, if accuracy is what you're going for, I would make sure that your reference, as well as whatever surface you're working on, is perpendicular to your eye line. And I would make that so that you don't have to crane your neck or anything to do so. So if I'm sitting in a chair right now and my reference and my work surface are both sitting flat on a table, I have to crane my neck over pretty dramatically to potentially even square myself up with those things. Now, if I had these things propped up, like if I had them up on an easel in front of me, or if I had them in some way like adhered to the wall, I could sit with a perfectly straight back. I could look straight out in front of me and my drawing and my reference would be right there. That's way more ergonomic. It also helps to minimize any distortions that you get from viewing your piece and your reference at an angle. Okay, so already I need to shift this over so that you all can see both things simultaneously. So the right side of his face needs to be about here. Now, this isn't a necessary step for notans, but this is just how I like diving into the face in general. I want to have the overall shape of the head down, and then the very next thing I will typically like to do is to go ahead and try and find the vertical center line of the face, and then do the same thing with the eye line. So in theory, this little arc that I created should capture the curve of the line that passes through both corners of his eyes and could wrap all the way back around the head. I also have a little indication here for the brows as well. Now, following the center line, I can just start to make sure that I have the nose placed correctly. And you'll see, this is not me getting into the thick of a notan. This is really me just making sure my overall landmarks are looking decent. Because for you to be able to appreciate the purpose of this exercise, I need this to have at least a certain level of realism. And you'll see what I do as I take this piece to completion is that I will actually wind up losing a lot of this information. Okay, and then one thing I'm going to go ahead and do is that in general, I really don't prefer to draw in the eyes themselves. I wanted to see if potentially it would work with this piece, but instead I'm going to go back to what's tried and true for me, which is that I like to mass in the overall eye socket shape, which generally goes from the brow down through, typically there's like this little tear trough right here, and then sometimes there's a shadow of like the bag under the lower lid that is sometimes another important landmark to take a look at. So depending on the lighting in the individual image, I will go ahead and sketch in that eye socket accordingly. So from here, just to kind of unmuddle some of these light shapes, I'm going to start to remove this center line that I have running through the face, because I really want to be able to see that a little bit more cleanly. I want to be able to see what my dark shapes are supposed to be here. Okay, so really quickly, I'm going to go ahead and actually use my pencil to go ahead and test what this two-value structure is going to look like. Hard to say from the angle that I'm sitting at exactly how accurate this is, but what I can say is that overall, this looks like a person. And I think this is one of the things that I would really encourage you all to practice, especially if you want to get better at portraits, but this really applies regardless of what it is that you want to paint. So long as you want to paint something representational, something that looks like something else and is meant to be able to depict something else, really being able to simplify this down to the basic black and white structure is so incredibly useful. And I'll explain why. So in Sargent's drawing, it's super easy to think, okay, the darkest value is going to be the value of the pupils and it's going to be the value of the hair. Then my next darkest value is going to be the shadow on the face. Then my next darkest value, more of a midtone, is going to be this part of the face. And then we have the lights over off to the right. And this could be totally fine. You could create an accurate portrait this way, but it's going to be a little bit slower. And you're going to find that you have less room to really push and explore and simplify and play with the color and create really dramatic compositions because you're going to get sucked into those details. On top of that, if you are at more of a beginner stage with being able to paint what it is that you want to paint or move into oil, one of the most common things that I see is a portrait that really gets muddied up brushwork, where you can tell what it was meant to depict, but you couldn't ever really mistake the painting for that thing, even from across the room or if you were squinting at it really hard. And this is why most people feel disappointed with their paintings in the earlier stage. It feels like it's just not convincing and it's hard to put your finger on why. And funnily enough, doing a study like this one, it doesn't look like it would be convincing as you look at it on the page right here. But if I had this fully rendered out to match the values of this, so if I were working on a cream colored surface, I got my dark values to about this level of darkness, especially if I were working on it small and I taped it up on a wall across the room from where you were standing, you might have a hard time distinguishing it from the Sargent, for instance. Now, that's not to say that I'm going to get anywhere close to the mastery of Sargent in something like this, but just serves as an example of something that looks deceptively simple can, in fact, be the vehicle that gets you to something really convincing. And if you want to paint more like an impressionist, or if you want to use really dramatic, almost imagined color in your pieces, really understanding the value structure and being able to simplify that value structure is essential. And when you look at even just a little sketch like this one thing that really stands out is that there's two main ways in which I've simplified this. I've simplified the drawing structure, so I don't have detail of the eyes or the brows. I don't have a nostril in here. There's a lot that's really missing from this depiction. But the other way in which I've simplified it is that I have effectively reduced the value range to 2. There's areas where I have pencil marks, and there's areas that's just the clean white sheet of paper. So especially in portraits, I would really encourage you to practice something like this, whether you're using a pencil, marker, paint, whether you're using something like Procreate, doesn't matter what medium you are using. I would encourage yourself to really think about these two ways in which you can start making really meaningful decisions. Look for those places where you have the opportunity to consolidate your shapes down to something very simple. See if you can accurately capture a likeness without ever painting anything that looks like it's supposed to be an eye or eyelashes or a nostril or lips. See if instead you can break it down to really simple shapes, but still really capture the essence of who you were painting. And similarly, take an image like this one that has so many value gradations and see if you can decisively figure out how to break that down into 2 values. It might not feel like there is a singular right answer. For instance, I could have exposed this very differently in my own mind, and I could have brought the darks all the way up to where we see them right in the dimple of the chin and the bridge of the nose. That could have been just as valid, but it is really helpful to force yourself to make that decision of, if I only had lights and darks, where would I draw the line? And knowing where to do that, I think, comes from practice and comes from repetition. But the more that you're able to do something like this, the more you're going to be able to create portraits like the ones that you see on this channel. If you have any questions about how to do this exercise, make sure to let me know in the comments. I'll be taking a look to see what you all want to know and understand more about this, because this really is such an instructive and informative exercise. Similarly, if getting this kind of feedback is really helpful to you and you know this is the kind of support that you need to reach your painting goals, I would encourage you to check out my program, the Alla Prima Bootcamp. I have more information down in the description, as well as a link to apply to see if we are a fit to work together. All right, until next time, happy painting or drawing.